Last week I talked a little bit about my nature and how I can't help but try to win every game no matter what dishonor it causes me. And I've been thinking a lot about that and about how the Japanese culture of Go became this thing where it was important to play beautifully, and that is by far the farthest thing from what I try to do on the board. I don't really think too much about beauty in the game, and maybe in order to become stronger, I should try that. I always think about trying to go and play a game without the aggressive mentality that I usually have, and then I end up not following that because once I'm sucked into the Go board, a different side of me comes out, and it's hard to suppress that side of me. But I'm thinking about how I can really try to honestly approach the game with calmer and more peaceful attitude, because I think when I've done that in the past, I've actually been quite successful with it. I remember one time I was really just trying to make sure that I wasn't being over aggressive, and I ended up killing a large group without even trying. I wasn't attacking it at all. It's just my opponent didn't take care of their groups, and it just ended up dying. Of course, it was a lower level game than what I'd be playing now, but I mean, I think there's still some value in it, and maybe I should try to do that one more time. Welcome to Start Point, the show about Go for Go fans, away from the board. And before we get into the topic of this episode, I want to make a quick announcement and tell you all that this is the second last episode of the season. That's right. So the next episode 48, will be the season finale, and I will be taking a 1 month break. Well, so kind of like a 4-episode time period of Start Point, and I'll be right back with it. This break is just really so that I can kind of reset, reevaluate where we're going with the show, see if I can make any changes, or if not, I'll come back the same old me. But I thought it might be a good idea for me to step back just for a little bit. But don't worry, I'll be back with more episodes soon enough. It will be a good time to binge any episodes that you've missed. So I just wanted to let y'all know that. I'll talk a little bit more about it next week, but let's get into the episode. And the topic of today's episode is the Classic of Weiqi. So the Classic of Weiqi is one of the oldest pieces of writing about Go. It's an ancient Chinese work of the 10th or 11th century by someone named Zhang Ni. And I won't try to butcher the title of it in Chinese. I will let a robot say it for me.
奇经13篇.
And that just means the Classic of Weiqi. And this is a freely available translation that I found. I'll link it in the description. But I thought I'd just kind of read through it and react and just comment on it as we go through it, and it'll be an opportunity for you to hear the words of wisdom about this game. It's a whole 13 chapters, all about Go and the nature of Go and what you're supposed to do in Go and what Go represents, and it's a very interesting piece of work. I've only glimpsed through it, so I haven't fully read it in detail, so it'll be fun. Let's see how far we can get today. We might have to break this episode up into a couple parts, but let's get into it. So we'll start with the introduction, and it starts off saying, Zhuo Zhuan stated, "Those who stuff themselves with food all day without applying their mind to anything are in a hard situation. Are there no Weiqi players then? It is certainly better to be one of them than to be idle." Now, some of you might recognize this quote, and it was actually from a writing of Confucius. So Zhuo Zhuan here in this it represents Confucius, but in the footnotes it says that it's an ancient history text, and it's a paragon of classical Chinese prose. So I guess it's a collection. It's the Analects, maybe. I'm not quite sure. Anyone who is more knowledgeable on this matter can correct me. I'm going to continue on reading. In his Xinlun, Huan Tan wrote, "There is now a game called Weiqi, concerning which some say that it is a kind of simulation of war. The skillful player, fully cognizant of its configurations, places his pieces so as to encircle those of his opponent and thus win. The average player, although he aims at gaining advantages, can isolate his adversary. Therefore, whether he wins or loses, he must always be attentive and circumspect, and must also carefully calculate and evaluate in order to be certain of winning. The inexpert player, although able to defend sides and corners, moves in small areas, limiting himself simply to surviving in small portions of territory. Since the period of the springs and autumns, all ages have had players of these categories, so that the way of Weiqi has always prospered. The most important problems dealing with victory and defeat, divided into 13 chapters, are now examined. Extract from Sun Tzu's Bingfa have sometimes been inserted into the text. So that was the introduction, and then we'll get into the chapters. So it's very interesting. We I think as Go players kind of recognize the relevance of Sun Tzu's Art of War, which is what is called Bingfa in this text. And it's not without reason. It's been called a text associated with this game for a very long time, and it's been called a military strategy game for a very long time, and that's deep in the history of the game. So this is a text that exemplifies that. So let's get into chapter 1, which is called On the Pieces and the Board. It's an exposition about what the board and pieces represent. The number of the 10,000 beings originates from the One. Therefore, the 360 intersections of the Weiqi board also have their One. The One is the generative principle of numbers, and, considered as a pole, produces the 4 cardinal points. 360 intersections correspond to the number of days in a year. Divided into 4 corners, like the 4 seasons, they have 90 intersections each, like the number of days in a season. There are 72 intersections on the sides, like the number of ho in a year. The 360 pieces are equally divided between black and white, modeled on yin-yang. The lines on the board form a grid called ping, and the squares they compose are called gua. The board is square and quiet. The pieces are round and active. I really like that. The board is square and quiet, and the pieces are round and active. It's a very poetic description of the game. I really like the picture it paints using just this grid and bunch of stones and imbuing it with all this meaning in terms of the time, the division of the year and things like that. It's a very interesting way to think about the game, and it makes me curious how this writer thought of it and whether it was like a cultural norm at the time to think about all this stuff. Continuing on, ever since ancient times, no player has ever happened to place the pieces on the board in exactly the same way as he did during a preceding game. Zhuo Zhuan states, every day is new. Therefore, reasoning must go deep, and analysis must be perfect, and an attempt must be made to understand the processes that lead to victory and defeat. Only in this way is it possible to attain that which is still unattained. Very, very dramatic, very cool. A lot of this, when I'm reading it, a lot of this does seem like old stuff that we don't say anymore, but a lot of it does still seem like things we just say naturally about the game, like 1,000 years later, saying how no player has ever placed the pieces on the board in exactly the same way. We say this all the time. This is something we're always going to be saying, I think, about the game, and I think that's a very fascinating aspect of the game, how unique every game is. And that was chapter 1. So you can kind of get a sense of how long the chapters are. They're not very long. So we'll move on to chapter 2 on calculations. The player whose configurations are correct can exercise power over his adversary. He must therefore establish his strategy internally, so that his configurations are complete externally too. If he is able to work out who will win while the game is still being played, he has calculated well. If he is not able to work this out, he has calculated badly. If he does not know who is the winner and who is the loser at the end of the game, he has made no calculations at all. It is written in Sun Tzu's Bing Fa, those who calculate greatly will win. Those who calculate only a little will lose. But what of those who don't make any calculations at all? This is why everything must be calculated, in order to foresee victory and defeat. That seems like it would go without saying, right? Just think about your moves, think about what the results and outcome will be. But I gotta tell you something, I don't calculate, like I don't count. I think maybe part of this is talking about counting, because in order to know who will win and who will lose, you have to count the points. And I think that's maybe why I think the calculation word here, I'm sure also has to do with reading, but also about estimating points. And I rarely know. I actually don't. I'm one. So it's he talked about if the player who calculates greatly, and then the player who calculates only a little, and then the one who doesn't make any calculations at all. And I think that third one is me, because the only way I know if I'm winning a game is I feel it in my bones. I feel it in my bones that I made good shape and my opponent didn't, or something like that. Or there was a group that they lost, or a big chunk of territory that I have. Maybe I should calculate more. But to be fair to me and anyone else out there who doesn't calculate things, we play in a time where time is a lot shorter. I'm sure during this time, people played very, very long games. So I guess for me, I should at least try to calculate more in my correspondence games, where I do have pretty much unlimited time. I'm going to have to internalize this and really try to get to the point where I'm not so lazy about calculating and counting, because I think that's definitely something I hate doing and I don't want to do, and so I avoid doing, and maybe I'll try to do it some more. On to Chapter 3. On control of territory. Control of territory means the need to lay down the general lines of the game while the pieces are being positioned. At the beginning of the game, the positions are divided up at the four corners. Then play begins, and pieces are placed obliquely, missing out two intersections and placing one below. Starting from two adjacent pieces, 3 spaces may be skipped. With 3 adjacent pieces, 4. 5 spaces may be skipped if the player wishes to be nearer another configuration, but nearness does not mean adjacency, nor must distance be excessive. Let's break this down a bit. So I think what this is talking about is the principle of walls and how far you're able to jump from said walls. Starting from 2 adjacent pieces, 3 spaces may be skipped. So you know that joseki, the kick and the kick joseki, kick and extend. You kick, extend, and then they defend that corner, and then you go out 3 spaces from your standing 2 stones, right? So that's kind of like the rule of thumb, where when you make a normal 2-space extension, that's like off of a single stone. But if you make when you have 2 stones standing as a wall, you can make a 3-stone extension. When you have 3 stones standing as a wall, you can make a 4-space extension. And then it goes on to say you can go farther than you're supposed to if you're going to synergize with other stones. So, I mean, it's pretty crazy how many principles of Go have changed, especially with the advent of AI, but how many principles they've just been there since the beginning, since the ancient times. And that's apropos, because the next part says, all these things were debated by the ancients, and the rules were then studied by their successors. Therefore, those who do not wish to accept, but who wish to change their methods, cannot know what the results may be. Xi Jing states, without a good beginning, there can be no good end. So that's every Go player I feel like knows what this is really referring to. A lot of our Go starts from the opening, and a lot of the consequences of that opening can be felt later on. And it's interesting how truth on the board is kind of developed and built by a lot of people over time. And in order to really get to the gooey center of that truth, you have to accept these teachings and principles in order to get a foundation to expand your skills. And it's just so interesting. Like, how did this start? Because we have these principles that we've known for thousands of years. And when they started playing Go without any quote unquote ancients to look back to, like, what did they do? How did that discussion start? Imagine two players of Go. They discovered this game, and they're both obviously going to be double-digit Q players, and they're just like, wow, what an interesting little game that we've found. How does that couple of double-digit Q players expand into becoming so good at Go that you become a 7-dan in ancient times? Like, that's a mind-boggling thing to me, because all we know is that the old ancient players were good and they understood a lot. Obviously, they had some things that they didn't know that we currently understand. But I think it's a very interesting, imaginative exercise, at least for me. On to chapter 4, on engaging conflict. In the way of Weiqi, it is important to be careful and precise. At the end of the game, the skillful player will have succeeded in occupying the center of the board. The inexpert player will have occupied the sides, and the average player will find himself in the corners. These are the eternal methods of players. It is generally believed that sometimes many pieces may be lost, provided that the initiative is not lost. This is because losing the initiative means passing it to the other player, who did not have it before. Before attacking to the left, observe the right. Before invading the space behind your opponent's lines, observe what is in front of them. Whoa, there's a lot of stuff to unpack in that paragraph. I think one of the more interesting parts is at the top of that paragraph, which states that the skillful player will have succeeded occupying the center, the inexpert player will occupy the sides, and the average player will find himself in the corners, which is not really, I don't think it's like any advice or observation we hear nowadays. So it's an interesting thing to think about, why this author would think that if you're not so good at Go, you'll find yourself in the corners. Because we actually teach beginners to start with the corners, go to the side, and then the center. So I think there's a lot behind these words I'm not really fully understanding, and it's just an interesting, mysterious thing to think about. And then there's the part about initiative. And so obviously initiative in another way is called sente. So it's, the author's pretty much saying, make sure you use sente wisely. Don't give it up easily, and look around and observe and look at the best move on the board before doing what you think you want to do. Continuing on, in parentheses, Sun Tzu, a distant army must pretend to be close. A nearby army must appear to be distant. This quote kind of exemplifies itself in my game sometimes when I'm playing a certain area of the board, but my mind is focused on an entirely different area of the board. It's a very interesting and unique feeling. Continuing on, it is not necessary to divide two living groups, because both will live in any case, even if they are not linked together. The distance between pieces must be not excessive. Nearness must not be adjacency. Rather than keeping endangered pieces alive, it is better to abandon them and acquire new positions. Hey, this is just like a bunch of DDK Advice Corner stuff. I've said some of this before. Don't try to divide two groups that are just super strong anyway, because there's no point in dividing them. Whether they link or not, it doesn't matter, right? And then don't play too close to your stones, don't play too far from your stones. There's like a very efficient, optimal distance between your stones, and sacrifice useless and endangered stones. So seems like some of this stuff is like advanced advice, and some of this stuff is pretty basic. Like this paragraph seems to be like a piece of basic advice, at least from our lens in the modern era. Continuing on, the I Ching. In the same way that two autonomously, quote-unquote, living formations should not be divided, there is no sense in attempting to join two practically dead ones. Wow, interesting. Instead of expending effort in making worthless moves, exploit every opportunity which allows you to strengthen your position. When there are many enemy pieces but few of your own in a given territory, first of all, carefully consider your own chances of survival. If the opposite situation arises where your own pieces are numerous and your enemy is in difficulties, exploit that situation to extend your configurations, as the best victory is that gained without fighting. So the best position is one which does not provoke conflict. In any case, if you fight well, you will not lose, and if your ranks are not in disorder, you will lose well. Wait, what? If your ranks are not in disorder, you will lose well. I feel like if your ranks are not in disorder, you shouldn't lose. Anyway, although at the beginning of the game you must arrange the pieces according to the rules, at the end you must use your imagination in order to win. I feel like he's talking directly at me and saying, stop trying to provoke enemies and stop trying to provoke conflict. The best victory is gained without fighting. All right. Sun Tzu, in any battle, engage conflict with the enemy in the ordinary manner, but in order to win, use your imagination. I love how it keeps referring back to Sun Tzu and in the principles that it's describing. Carefully observe the most minute details of all territories. If they are solidly constructed, they cannot be overwhelmed. But if you surprise your adversary with an idea which has not occurred to him, you will be able to overwhelm him where he is unprepared. Sun Tzu, attack where the enemy is not prepared. Advance where he cannot even imagine you to be. That's hard. That's easier said than done. To come up with something with your imagination that the enemy can't fathom. I feel like most of the stuff in my games are very like easy to spot or obvious, or and I think I don't tanuki enough, and I don't leave possibilities open in areas of the board, so I can't do that kind of thing. I was watching a pro game with between Kim Eun-ji and another player, and it was an insane game. It was Kim Eun-ji was behind, and she the stones were kind of scattered, and it was just kind of uncertain what the settled state was, and she just made this crazy sequence of moves that just flipped the AI bar all the way around. Her opponent could not see what was coming, and it was just, I could not understand it, but it was still very interesting to see because it felt like it was a big concerted attack dealing with a huge area of the board. If your adversary defends himself without doing anything, it is a sign that in reality he intends to attack. If he neglects small territories and does not play in them, he is, in fact, plotting to make great conquests there. A player who puts down his pieces haphazardly is devoid of strategy. If he does not reflect and simply responds to his adversary's moves, he is on the path towards defeat. As Shi Jing observes, trembling with fear on the edge of the precipice. I really like that first part where if your adversary defends himself without doing it, it's like you're playing this game and your opponent just plays this gote move that just strengthens himself. And you're just like, you're just going to take a gote move? Fine. And then you put your guard down and you realize that gote was like an invisible sente where after that move, he's just winding up to punch you. And then the other part where if you notice your opponent neglecting certain areas, it means, he's trying to score big there. And I can definitely relate to that, where if I want a huge area of the board, I'm going to try to play away from it. I'm going to try to influence the other areas of the board so that I can get that later. So it's so cool to see this ancient text come to life, and to think about how it relates to my games that I play, my own experience in Go. That was chapter 4. So now we're on to chapter 5, on emptiness and fullness. In Weiqi, if you follow too many main strategies, your configurations will become fragmented. Once they are disrupted, it is difficult not to succumb. Do not play your pieces too close to those of your opponent, for if you do, you will make him full, but you will empty yourself. When you are empty, it is easy to be invaded. When you are full, it is difficult to overwhelm you. Sun Tzu. The formation of the army is like water. Like water, it moves from high places and flows downwards. In the same way, military formations should avoid whatever is already full and occupy the void. I think this is very... so this chapter called On Emptiness and Fullness, I think it really is talking about thickness and thinness, or thinness and thickness. Don't play close to thickness, right? It's it's very much resonates with that, I think, idea. Do not follow a single plan, but change it according to the moment. Shuo Xuan advised, if you see that an advance is possible, then advance. If you encounter difficulties, retreat. It is also observed, if you seize something, by the way, but do not change your method, at the end only a single thing will have been seized. This is always like, reading all these things, it keeps like, I feel attacked. I feel like when I play, I go for an attack, and then I keep going no matter what. I go all in, and I don't stop, and I don't retreat. I don't back off and think about what resources I might lose. And so I have to really take all this advice to heart. And I feel like it might be good to read this every now and then. This is actually a really nice piece of text for trying to inform yourself about how to play Go. We're going to do one more chapter, and then maybe we'll save the next half of this thing for another episode. Chapter 6, on knowing oneself. The wise man is able to foresee even things which are not yet visible. The foolish man is blind, even when the evidence is placed in front of his eyes. Thus, if you know your own weak points, you can anticipate what may benefit your adversary and thereby win. You will also win if you know when to fight and when to avoid conflict. If you can correctly measure the intensity of your efforts, if exploiting your preparation, you can prevent your adversary from being prepared too. If by resting you can exhaust your adversary, and if by not fighting you can subdue him. In Lao Tzu it is written, he who knows himself is enlightened. Sun Tzu. If you know when to engage battle and when to avoid conflict, you will win. If you know how to measure the intensity of your efforts, you will win. By exploiting your own degree of preparation, you can prevent your adversary from being equally prepared. You will win. I feel like this Classic of Weiqi was just written by looking at Sun Tzu's writing and seeing how it applies to Go. That's the feeling I get with all this these quotes of Sun Tzu after every chapter. And this one, I got to be honest, was a harder one to understand, I think. I think generally you can kind of see where it's going. The wise man is able to see things even when they're not visible. But the whole spiel about measuring the intensity of your efforts, I'm still kind of scratching my head around it. And I'm wondering what it really means. I have a lot to think about just after reading these 6 chapters. I'm actually looking forward to the remaining chapters. As a reminder, there's 13. But I'm really having fun reading this. This is great. I hope you're enjoying it as well, and I hope you'll join me when I continue this episode for part 2, but for now we're going to leave a bookmark in it here. I don't know about you guys, but I'm a sucker for ancient original texts. There's something magical about just seeing the written words of someone who lived thousands of years ago. And something that's really cool about Go is that you can see ancient game records. That in itself is also magical in its own way. I really like how interesting it feels to just look at an old game record and see how differently they played, and just the thinking of the fact that these players played these moves at some point in time. It's just an interesting thing to me. It's time for the DDK Advice Corner, and although you guys have heard a lot of DDK advice from the Classic of Weiqi itself, the tip of the day from me is something you probably won't see in the Classic of Weiqi. Avoid the armpit hit. If you don't know what an armpit hit, it's the opposite of a shoulder hit. If you don't know what a shoulder hit is, it's typically when the stone is on the third line and you play a move above it, diagonally to it, usually to kind of limit some influence or something like that. The armpit hit is when you put a stone underneath diagonally an opponent's stone, kind of hitting them in their armpit, which is a funny image to have. But I bring this up because someone armpit hit me on the second line. So this is a pretty deep armpit hit. And it was all downhill from there. That stone spawned a very, very weak group, and it kind of had a domino effect into the rest of the board, and that was GG. I got crazy influence. I killed that group, and it was over for my opponent. So the armpit hit, it's not always the wrong move, but it's generally considered a bad move. Don't put your stone diagonally under another stone just to kind of, as an invasion move. So avoid the armpit hit. That's the tip of the day. It's time for some Go news. The AGA has a new benefit for qualifying seniors, in partnership with Grouper, which is a company that works with different activities and clubs to encourage seniors to perform certain activities that are healthy for them, pretty much. And Go is a healthy activity. And then through Medicare, they're able to just get money for being active playing Go. In the AGA, you can get an initial for $50 check, as well as $20 quarterly ongoing active payments from Grouper if you're 65 and older. And you're eligible for Medicare. It's pretty cool. I think that's really cool to be paid to play Go. It's like you can kind of any kind of money that you can make. It's like, it's technically not money you're making because you play Go, but because you're kind of doing some kind of healthy activity. But it's just a funny thing to think about. So if you're 65 years or older, you live in the United States, and you're eligible, go check that out. It's really cool. I think that's a very cool benefit for playing Go. The 8th Mexico Go Congress was held at the National University of Mexico from June 22nd to the 24th. There were 56 attendees, and it took place on the 19th floor of the National University of Mexico's Cultural Center. The winner of this Go Congress tournament was Emil Garcia 5-Dan, who won the 6-round Open Championship and beat his longtime rival Abraham Florencia 6-Dan. There was also a pair Go tournament, a children's tournament, and Michael Chen, 1P, AGA professional, was also there. He played simul's, 2 rounds of simul's, for a total of 23 games, and there was a series of 3 lectures by Michael Chen, and he had this to say. Well, obviously the lectures would have been, I would say, probably in English and translated into Spanish, although I wonder if he would have given the lecture in Chinese and give it into... I'm not sure how good his Chinese is. The energy and passion of the Mexican Go community make lasting impressions on visitors, said Chen, with strong players like Emil and Abraham, who competed in the 2023 Pro qualifiers, and impressive numbers of young players in the children's tournament, Mexico's thriving Go community continues to develop and grow. Love to see it. Love to see the activity in Mexico around Go. And big thanks to Michael Chen for representing and contributing to the growth of Go in Mexico. Over 1,200 registrations for the European Go Congress in Toulouse is currently underway, which is very, very impressive. In the United States, the American Go Congress typically reaches around the 500 range in attendance. So we got a huge scene over there in Europe. I'm really jealous of you guys. Got a giant Go Congress, although I don't... See, the thing is, you guys have like a smaller land area. Europe is smaller than the United States, right? Europe, what do you call it? Area versus Europe area would be 4 million miles squared. US area is, the United States is smaller. Makes sense. Typically, here my Americanness is showing with my failure in geography, but I am also Canadian, so I do know that Canada has the second largest landmass in the entire world, and maybe that's where my idea of North America, or the US being so big, came from, but okay. In any case, proportionally speaking, Europe has a lot more Go players, it seems, which is great. Well, it's not great for us here, but it's great for the Go community in general. Really cool to see how many people are registering for the European Go Congress. The EGC will be held from June 26th to the 10th of August in Toulouse, France. The second Chuzhou Lanka Cup finalists have been determined. So, in the semifinals, Gu Zihao defeated Park Jong-hwan. Yamayuta defeated Byun Sang-il. And then Shin Jin-seo defeated Yang Jin-shin. And Ding Hao defeated Kang Dong-yun. And then in the... those would have been the quarterfinals. And then the semifinals, Shin Jin-seo defeated Ding Hao, and Gu Zihao defeated Yamayuta. And so this is the second cup in a row where Shin Jin-seo and Gu Zihao will be facing off in the finals. And there have only been 2 Lanka Cups. So it seems like a pattern is being set up here. And the finals of the Lanka Cup, I do not know when they will be, but I will be sure to cover it when the results come out. And now it's time for some listener mail. Eric writes, "Hello. First of all, thanks for making this great podcast. I've been longing for such a thing for the last decade or so, and when I found out that it now exists, I was very happy. The range of topics have been great, and I think they would be of interest to players of all sorts of games, if they would come up with the idea to listen. Just to give you some more data points, I'm also an amateur tennis player and hobby musician. I first learned about Go in a book about board games from all around the world. I think my first chance to actually play the game was on Yahoo. At this time, I had no idea how to acquire a Go set and left it at that. When I started university, I ran into someone who knew how to play and we started a Go club together. He later became one of the strongest players here in Sweden, while I've been stuck as a SDK forever." Thanks for writing in, Eric. Thanks for your kind words about the podcast. I'm really glad to have this be entertaining to anyone who's willing to listen. And it's great because there's another one over there. All Things Go is another great podcast, so you got plenty to listen to. And then in terms of you being a tennis player and a hobby musician, awesome. I'm curious to know what your musical instrument you play. I always lose my ability to speak during listener mail. I don't know what it is. It's like I don't have the music playing for me. I know you guys can hear it, but I don't have it playing while I record. So I can't blame that. I don't know why. Anyway, why am I talking about this? Okay, I'm so sad I never got to play Go on Yahoo, because I remember seeing it there, but I was not interested in it, and I'm really curious what the culture was like there. And it's also interesting that you mentioned that you learned about Go in a book about board games. Another listener wrote in to say that, so I wonder if it was the same book. Continuing on, I work as a game designer, and Go has, of course, had a lot of influence on my philosophy about games and what makes them good. I sometimes think about what would happen if a contemporary designer came up with a game system as deep and elegant as Go, something I think is very rare. Most modern games focus on completely different aspects. It would most likely not be very popular to begin with, and the depth would only be revealed if players kept studying it for many years. Not that such a game is really needed. I think Go is about as perfect for its niche as you can get, and the cultural weight of being around for so long is of course also a big part of the appeal. I do think that some of Rainer Knizia's masterpieces, like Tigris and Euphrates and Through the Desert, have remnants of Go in them, while at the same time being a lot more approachable. Those are high recommendations for anyone who can't get their friends to play Go with them. When you say game designer, are you talking about board games specifically, or are you? I'm curious what kind of game designer you are. But since that you're talking about board games, I also want to give some shout outs. I haven't played this one personally, but TAC is another one that reminds me of Go in how abstract it is, and it seems like a strategically deep game. Another one that is very comparable to Go, I think, is Blockus. It is about taking space, and it's really fun. It's a lot more casual. You can definitely get into it a lot more easier than Go. I'm gonna have to check out Tigris and Euphrates and Through the Desert. I have not played those either. And then another shout out I want to give is to a game called Onitama. That game is like a mini chess, and the concept is that you have a king and 4 pawns, and these pawns can move in various ways depending on which card you pick up, and each card has its own movement pattern. And so it's like, you know, some of them move like in an L, some of them can only move diagonally to the right, and so it's very interesting, and I would love to see kind of a theme stylized version of Go somehow that kind of abstracts the mechanics of the game and then create something new with it, like Onitama does with chess. It's a very chess-like game, but it has its own spin on it, and it's really cool. I highly recommend checking it out if you like chess and you want a kind of fun minigame version of it. I recently listened to the episode where you talked to Telegraph Go about the concept of power. I found the discussion fascinating, and his reasoning was somewhat new to me, though I've heard similar ideas mentioned here and there. I think it would be very interesting to have him return and maybe try to get a more clear description of what he meant. If he can actually defend his position, I feel like a lot of book knowledge is actually kind of wrong, or at least presented in the wrong way. Anyway, thanks again for the podcast, and keep up the good work. Cheers, Eric. Well, thanks for writing in, Eric, and I honestly, that was a very interesting conversation that I had with him, and I still think about stuff from that conversation. I think the thing is that Nate, Telegraph Go, he has a very interesting mind and a very interesting way of organizing his thoughts and concepts, and that's why it comes out in such novel ways. And yeah, I'd love to have him on the show again to kind of clarify, and it's possible that he clarifies on his own channel too. I know he's kind of busy right now. He just finished playing in the pro qualifier, so we'll see if he kind of comments on it a little more later on. But yeah, I love that discussion. That was great. Thanks for writing in again, Eric. Ursa Majoris says, thanks for your work. Where should I find a good Go teacher as a complete beginner? As a complete beginner, I think your best bet is to see if there are any local clubs and try to show up to a Go club where you can meet a friend who can kind of show you the basics in person. As long as that friend has been playing for a while, they're kind of like in the mid, at least maybe like around the 15Q level, they can kind of teach you a lot of the basics. As a complete beginner, I think you can learn also a lot just by playing games. Just play a lot of games. You can learn a lot of the basics just by doing that. Watch videos and things like that. In terms of getting like a teacher, I don't know if it's quite necessary yet. If you really do want a teacher, I don't have a whole lot of resources for you. But I do know, I did mention paulgote.com, Polgote. Let's just make sure it's like .com domain. Paulgote. Yeah, paulgote.com has teacher finding function. So you can go check that out. There are plenty of teachers floating around on Reddit as well. If listeners, you guys know any good teachers, please give them a shout out in the comments so that people like Chai or some Majoris can find them. Thanks for writing in. Faran writes, Segoe killed himself after Cho returned to Korea for military duty. That frames their early interaction somehow. We're talking about a man with issues with the Neon Kin and a son who died in his arms in agony while he was hosting the Honimbo. Yes, it's very tragic. I chose not to mention that actually in my episode, not to be a downer, but it's very sad that Segoe decided to do that. And just as an obligatory, if you're dealing with any kind of ideation or depression, please seek help. Just talk to anyone and let them know you're not alone. And the question of the week this week is, what did you think of the stuff in the Classic of Weiqi? Were there any things in there that spoke to you particularly? And I'd love to know your thoughts on it, whether you've read it before, whether you have any more historical insight on it. I really enjoyed it. I'm definitely going to go back to it and read it some more, and I'm excited to read the rest of it with you guys. So if you want to share your thoughts on this question, or you have a ghost story to share or a question of your own, you can comment on YouTube or the Reddit post for this episode, or email me directly at startpointpaduk@gmail.com. That's startpointpaduk@gmail.com. If you're a YouTube listener, I would love and appreciate a like and a subscribe. And if you're a podcast listener, I'd also appreciate a review and or a rating. A very special thank you to Jeffrey H. and John M. for supporting Starpoint. And I mentioned earlier in Go News that the European Go Congress was going to be held in Toulouse, which is a city in France. And was it like 1,200 people registered to play in Toulouse? But I think that none of them actually want Toulouse. Thanks for listening. Keep playing Go.